Why is it almost impossible to convince other people in political debates? And how is it that all these other people believe such stupid things? Is it because most people are super dumb while you are super smart? Most people think so. But in this essay, I will argue that we do not believe what we do because of our intelligence or any rational arguments at all, but because our beliefs come from the irrational way that each one of us looks at the world. In short, from our aesthetics. I would like to begin this essay by giving some context about how my own experiences have shaped the way that I think about arguments. The most important of these is my participation in several debate clubs where we practice British parliamentary debate. The interesting thing about this type of debates is that you did not get to pick your own positions. As a result, very often you would have to create convincing arguments for opinions that you personally find repulsive. Sometimes I had to play the communist, other times the hippie, and so on. This experience led me to the rationalization that one can argue effectively for and against anything and everything. Indeed, once you have a position to defend, it is possible to rationalize and justify just about anything in your favor, to build an impenetrable defensive network of arguments around it. But at the same time, I never became confused as what my real opinions were when I was making up fake arguments to win debates. I could make some excellent arguments for things that I disagreed with, but at a fundamental level, these arguments never resonated with me. But why? Why do the other side's arguments always seem to have such little effect? Is it because one side has achieved the truth through reason and logic? And if so, which side? The idea that one can get down to the truth through reason and critical thinking is the main idea of the tradition of the Enlightenment, and most people, including myself, agree with it at some level or another. We believe that if a person has enough critical thinking, is intelligent enough, then this person will sooner or later come to the correct conclusion by looking at the arguments and basing his beliefs on the best one. The idea that reason, intelligence, will always find truth through free argumentation leads to the conclusion that if someone believes in something incorrect, it must be because they lack critical thinking, are dumb, or are just ignorant. Therefore, a smart fanatic should be an impossibility. In theory, all that would be needed to turn a smart person away from the wrong idea is the perfect argument that they could neither refute nor ignore. However, my own experience has proven that there is, indeed, such a thing as a smart fanatic. In my case, this guy was a poli-sci major, and he was the most dedicated communist that I have ever met. He defended everything, from the Gulag to North Korea, but just stopped short of Pol Pot. He read the theory and had very good knowledge of history. This guy could churn out a text wall like it was nothing. Clearly, he was no idiot. But yet he was still impenetrable. It was like talking to a wall. I had internalized the belief that if only I could come up with the perfect argument, then he would have to give in. I pointed out that Stalin had tortured and shot Bukharin and Tukhachevsky, his own comrades, but he just avoided giving a straight answer and said that, the Soviet Union wasn't perfect. Yes, in order to build socialism, sometimes one makes mistakes. When I argued that every year there are thousands of people who escape from North Korea and tell their experiences, he just dismissed them as liars that were paid for by the CIA. When I asked how one can have a democracy in a one-party state, he essentially took 1,000 words to explain that since the party represents the people's real interests, then the dictatorship of the party is inherently democratic. All my beautiful arguments got mowed down like the British at the Somme. It was quite obvious that this was not even a conversation. Not for a second did I ever get close to making him question his own ideology. But how could this be? He was clearly a smart individual who must obviously see that there were some issues with his dogmatic views and with his mental gymnastics, but he stuck to the party line until the end. The issue was not that he lacked intelligence or critical thinking, but the real issue here was my belief that an intelligent person must always end up agreeing with me because of my facts and logic. Everyone believes at some level that their opinions are the result of intelligent analysis. Thus, anyone who disagrees with them is either stupid, naive, or incomprehensibly evil. Thus, I do not really believe that political polarization is just a result of a difference in intelligence, but something much deeper, and my experience with my communist acquaintance proved it to me. The fact is that some people are convinced by some arguments, while other people appear to be immune to the same ones. But why is a certain type of person predisposed to a certain type of argument? To answer this, I think that we must ask ourselves, what makes an argument convincing? A convincing argument is not convincing because it has flawless logic. One can certainly make a very persuasive argument for a very stupid idea. This is because persuasion is not rational. Instead, it is driven by feelings. A persuasive argument is an argument that has an emotional effect. As a result, an argument can never be persuasive to everyone. But what does this depend on? What makes a person vulnerable to some arguments and immune to others? I would argue that an individual's taste in arguments is very much like his taste in cinema and music. It is fundamentally an aesthetic choice. All arguments have the same fundamental structure. They all try to convince you that something is either desirable or undesirable. Let's take an example, a very easy one. Drugs are bad, you shouldn't do them. This argument will be very effective with a conscientious Christian, but very ineffective with a dude who's just like chill and wants to, enjoy life, dude. An argument can only resonate with a person that agrees with the argument's definition of what is desirable. Your nice Christian neighbor will think that it is undesirable to smoke the devil's grass, and therefore he will readily agree with you and your argument. But the person who just wants to enjoy the moment will disagree with you, since what is desirable to him is to take a hit right now. Our concept of what is desirable is not a definition in our heads. It is a sensation that attracts us and is impervious to any rational argument. I cannot convince a junkie to get off his stuff any more than you can convince me to stop enjoying a nice medium rare steak. So, in a very real sense, political communication is almost impossible, because the political left and the political right have completely different aesthetics, totally different ideas of what is desirable, and by extension, each other's arguments are incomprehensible and repugnant. I believe that the only way to understand the aesthetics of a political movement is to look at their art. To illustrate the aesthetics of the left and the right wing, I will play two different clips from two different songs. There are many left-wing songs that embody their aesthetic vision, such as Imagine or the Internationale, but I decided on an old Yiddish Bundes song written in 1938 during the Great Depression in Poland. The name of the song is the Arbeitlozer marsch, or the March of the Jobless. Listen to it while reading the translation.
3, 4 Arbeitslose sehnen mir, jahrelang Arbeit schwer und geschafft als mehr heißer Schlösser, Städten, Länder, Fahrer, Heifele, Verschwender, unser Leute, Fahr ist was, Hungerneut und arbeitlos, Hungerneut und arbeitlos. 1, 2, 3, 4 und 2 marschieren wir, Arbeitslose Schritt nach Schritt und wir singen sicher Lied von der Land der Welt nahe, wo es leben Menschen freie, arbeitslos ist kein Schumand in dem nahen freien Land, in dem nahen freien Land.
The message of the song and the aesthetic that it conveys is at first of temporary injustice. The workers don't have enough bread even though they have worked hard for years, because the markets crashed in Wall Street. Whether they care about New York. They care about feeding their families, about having the possibility to work. And so, in the last stanza of the song, they sing about marching towards a new land, where they will be free and where there will be enough for everyone. This new land is what moves them and what has motivated the left wing for over 200 years. There have been many descriptions of this world to be, both socialist and religious, but the core message is that things are bad now, but we will make them better, and that together we will make the world a paradise. The yearning for paradise is, as far as I can tell, what stands at the heart of every leftist. John Lennon's Imagine and the Socialist Internationale might have different lyrics, but their core message is the same, and they all appeal to the same type of person. As right-wingers, this is a side of leftism that we rarely see, because they usually see us as the obstacle towards this beautiful new world. But behind their anger and their smugness, I believe that there is a deep yearning and a very human desire to live in a place free of suffering. The right-wing aesthetic, I think, is best represented by this Russian song by the name of Regiments are Marching. It was written by white Russian exiles in Yugoslavia after their defeat in the Russian Civil War. The first thing to notice about the song is that it talks about conflict, and specifically conflict between groups of people. There is a clearly defined us and them. This is characteristic of the right-wing aesthetic, which looks at the world through a lens of competition between peoples, a Darwinian reality full of conflict. The core message is that things are tough now, and they have always been this way, but through bravery and strength one can overcome all difficulties and defeat all enemies, as your ancestors have done in the past. Indeed, it is my belief that the thing that defines right-wing beliefs is the search for strength and the hatred of weakness. Another thing to mention is that this song is quite unconcerned with the idea of justice. Specifically with the line, "It doesn't matter whether we win or die. It has always been like this." I interpret this to mean that defeat is not unjust because it means that you were weaker than your enemy. Therefore, justice, what is fair, is not important given that the options are either victory or death. The left-wing aesthetic is based specifically on the idea of justice and calls for a fight against injustice. The right-wing aesthetic is far less moralistic. It accepts reality as it is and puts more focus on facing reality. When one looks at the left-wing aesthetic, one barely sees any mention of the past, but only mentions of a beautiful future to come. The right-wing aesthetic, on the other hand, has a strong emphasis on the veneration of one's ancestors and their deeds. However, it is also interesting to notice how little the right-wing aesthetic talks about a better future, since they are much more concerned with living up to their own past. Now that we describe these two main political aesthetics, the most interesting question becomes, what attracts people to either one of them? Perhaps it is that I come from a family of psychologists, but I tend to think that a person's psychology is first and foremost what predefines their politics, second only to their own life experiences that push them towards one side of the political spectrum or another. For example, let's go back to this communist that I used to debate. The guy himself studied political science. Now, the market doesn't really treat people with humanities degrees kindly. So when he gets shafted by the employment market, he will have two choices. Either he accepts that he wasted his entire professional life into a useless discipline, which is objectively true, or maybe it's just that capitalism is the problem. I think it is no coincidence that the people from fields with bad economic prospects tend to gravitate towards socialism. But on the other hand, other professions are inherently right-wing, such as, for example, the military. But there is no question that material conditions and resentment play an important role in our choice of aesthetics. However, personal experiences affect one's aesthetics at an even deeper level. To give a personal example, I believe that one of the bigger reasons why I became right-wing was my parents' divorce. I love both of my parents. However, they did have relationship issues. So who is to blame for all my pain and suffering during the divorce, for the dismemberment of my family? Of course, something like that can't just be normal, it can't just be right. There has to be some problem somewhere, some reason that my family broke apart. Many people, of course, blame one of their parents, but I never thought that one of my parents was somehow a bad person or directly guilty for the divorce. However, it was obvious that my parents' actions led to catastrophe. So my teenage self concluded that it was not the fault of either one of my parents, but of the ideas in their heads. The ideas that our culture accepts about men and women, about relationships and love. And that these ideas were guilty for the divorce. Since then, I have had a propensity towards thinking that our culture is rotten and full of decadent ideas, leading me towards a more pessimistic outlook on politics. Of course, analyzing how a person's experience and material conditions can impact their political ideas is very interesting, and I could go on for hours ruminating about this, but that is not the purpose of this essay. Instead, my purpose today is to counter the idea that we get our ideas and political opinions from our rational mind. One can certainly rationalize their own prejudices very well with intelligence, facts, and logic, but these arguments cannot be the source of a person's political and ethical beliefs, because these arguments must always appeal to something else, to a person's emotions, which is the true source of their beliefs. I believe that the idea that we are rational beings that get all their ideas from their big brains is so popular because it is very self-serving. The idea that everyone except us, except me, is irrational is very rewarding because we can act all smug and be sure of ourselves in difficult political arguments. We can comfortably avoid facing our own irrational parts and beliefs while having the luxury of pointing them out in others. If we take the perspective that we are full of political prejudice and that our arguments are just a long series of rationalizations, then the reality that political discourse is rare to find and hard to have makes complete sense. I do very much enjoy political discourse, but as an exercise and nothing more. Because in reality, I am as close-minded as that old communist in the debate club. I have my ideas. I like my ideas. They are grounded on my own aesthetic preferences and my life experiences. No libtard is going to shake them with some dollar store argument, and neither am I going to be capable of strangling their own naive idealism. So is that it? Everybody lives in their own heads with their aesthetics, and any interaction between ideas is impossible? I don't think so, but I certainly think that effective political persuasion cannot be done through arguments. Instead, I think that it can only be done through art. An idea communicated through film, music, or literature is far more powerful than any argument can ever hope to be. This is because it skips the trench networks that we have built up in our minds to resist enemy arguments and goes straight to the source, to our emotions, our hopes, and our fears. If you want to understand the ideas of your political enemy, you need to watch their movies to admire their paintings and to sing their songs. If you want to convince others of your beliefs, you need to do it through aesthetic means. One old example of this is the success of Leni Riefenstahl, best known for her 1936 Olympics film, where she overlaid the aesthetics of National Socialism over the beautiful bodies of the Olympic athletes. The film has no overt political messaging, and yet I think it is the most powerful propaganda that the Nazis ever created. Of course, a more relevant example of this is the 1960s counterculture. There was no real geopolitical arguments being made against the Vietnam War, but the youth opposed the war because they opposed the man and being square. The victory of the counterculture was the result of their music, fashion, and hedonistic lifestyle. Their aesthetic vision completely won over the young boomers who grew under the conservative aesthetics of the 1950s. But of course, in terms of political art creation, the right wing is outgunned by the left wing as a Sardinian fishing boat was outgunned by the Royal Navy. The left has almost complete control of Hollywood, the music industry, almost all the humanities faculties, actually all of them. Perhaps the most important reason why conservatives fail to conserve anything is that modern culture is aesthetically left-wing. Star Wars, Harry Potter, the Marvel Universe, etc. are all products of a liberal Weltanschauung and could not exist without it. Same thing in the music industry and even more so in the arts. The result is that everyone has the left liberal aesthetic worldview as the default option. Therefore, all right-wing movements have an uphill battle where they must really tread carefully not to set off the Voldemort alarm. I would go ahead and even argue that most of today's conservatives operate under the left's aesthetics. The type of conservative that rails against the woke status quo, not because they are truly hardened reactionaries, but because they wish to return to the liberal normality of the 1990s where everything made sense and people were not crazy with the woke. Right-wing aesthetics have a presence in media only insofar as they leak into news stories from older ones with intrinsically right-wing narratives. Ideals of heroism and redemption of sin and tragedy are almost universally against the aesthetics of the modern left, but they are present under the surface of almost all modern stories and will reveal themselves upon closer inspection. Even though the left has an almost complete hegemony on aesthetics, I remain optimistic because they are making one huge mistake. They have thrown out almost all the great art made by the past, from the sculptures of the Greeks, to the paintings of the Renaissance, to the classics of literature, etc. To them, they are all creations of old white men that have since been replaced, with predictable results. Hollywood isn't what it used to be. Today's music cannot hold a candle to the music that Lips used to make in the 60s, and let's not even talk about the state of modern art and the atrocities that come out of the faculty. So, on the aesthetic front, there is much to be done. A right wing that can embody the aesthetics of the past and bring them to the present is going to attract more and better people than 1,000 Ben Shapiros with their facts and logic. No one has ever been seduced by an argument.